Isn't it good to be doing this? And I mean this, actually even this particular rhythm of Old Testament, New Testament, Psalm, Proverb. I mean, am I wrong, or is this a great blessing? I'm glad we're doing this, and I'm glad that so many of you are keeping your noses to the grindstone and keeping yourself in the Word of God, because there's a blessing in this. It really is a good rhythm. I also want to say a word or two before we begin about this group of people that gathered in the Brevard Walmart parking lot the other day and headed off into the woods where there were wild creatures. I don't know if you can see it, but that right there is a black snake. Yeah, yummy. It was really cool. We headed into the woods and we braved the wild creatures, the dangerous animals, in order that we might see this. And it was glorious and fun and a lot bigger than it looks like in that picture. See there? That right there is Phil. And that's the waterfall. It is many Phils tall. And it was so pretty, and we had a great time. Many of us stayed up at the top there. Some of us forded down the rocks, and we had adventure, and we wandered about a bit, and we got contemplative and thought deep thoughts and thinks, and we looked at the waterfall, and this happened. And why am I telling you about all this? Why am I showing you my vacation slides? It wasn't vacation, folks. This was church. For a brief time, the Lord of creation laughed and rejoiced together with His people beside the waterfall that He made for the sake of joy. We got to do that because the Carters invited us to. And the reason I'm telling you about this is to remind us all that church is more than worship. That it's the opportunity to love each other and to spend time together having fun. And it may be that, like I said, I got sore walking up the steps. And it may be that you're not wanting to go to a waterfall. Fine, go to a coffee shop. Go to a restaurant. Go to a movie. Go to church. And by that I don't just mean come to this building. Spending time with our brothers and sisters is one of the things that builds cohesion, is one of the things that allows us to practice discipleship together. And church is so much more than worship. Worship is something church does. It is not what church is. Church is getting together with fellow Christians. Now, if you're not doing this, then that other stuff is irrelevant. If you're not regularly worshiping, if you're not setting your heart into Jesus, then, playing bridge is fun, but it's not salvific. But if you're doing this, and then you gather together to play bridge with the people that you're doing this with, that is redemptive. We need to be spending time together. You want your faith to grow? Eat with a Christian regularly. Someone that isn't got your last name and shares your address. All right, so I just want to begin with probably one of our favorite things to get in the mail. This is better than a Christmas card, isn't it? Don't you love it? No? I'm hearing groans. Because jury duty. I get to go to jury duty, said no one ever. Have you done this? Have you ditched this? Tell the truth. Have you done it? Have you gone? Because jury duty, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of what jury duty is like. So what you do is you go and you sit in chairs that were clearly designed by the CIA for enhanced interrogation purposes. Because they're very, very uncomfortable. It doesn't matter. You're going to be sitting all day long, and you cannot get comfortable the entire time. When you get there, if you're lucky, you're getting paneled with 12 other people who couldn't figure out a good excuse to get out of jury duty. Right? And then if you're impaneled on that thing, the one thing is you end up in this room. Right? And nobody likes to end up in this room, do you? It's not fun. Although if you're going to be in this room, the jury box is the place you want to be, right? Because you don't want to be in either of these other... Well, I guess this table's probably not bad. That's the prosecution, right? But you don't want to be sitting at that table, right? And so you go But my experience of jury duty is that it's mostly not in that room. It's mostly in rooms that look like this. And by this, I mean really blurry. It's just... That was funny to me. And... mostly the thing that you pay the most attention to when you're on jury duty is something that looks like this. In that way, it's very like church for some of us. But you just sit there all day in a room that no one really feels all that comfortable talking in because you're there for official business. So you can hear that thing doing its job, which is And you're like, okay, that's 10 seconds of my life that I can never get back. And it goes on to that. Am I wrong about this? Jury duty is boring. There are very few New York Times bestsellers written about the experience of jury duty. In fact, I looked on Amazon. There isn't one paper book that you can buy about jury duty. There is an ebook that you can buy, but you can't capture the image of it, so I didn't get it. It is How to Get Out of Jury Duty. That's it. This is something that's real and in our society. It's important. My point in this sermon actually is not how to get out of jury duty. If you get summoned, you ought to go. It's part of being an American. You're allowing for someone else to have their rights. Because a person has a right to a fair trial, and a person has a right to a jury of their peers. We ought to do this. It's part of our society, right? And one of the things that we face in this world, though, is that justice is hard. It is really, really hard to produce justice in this broken world. Not only is justice blind, it's really, really hard. Because justice is trying to be created, and I mean no offense to anyone by this, but justice is trying to be created by unjust creatures. We in our nature aren't terribly just. We try, we organize society. There are people whose job it is to protect the innocent and to capture the guilty and to avenge. There are people whose job it is to make sure that people get a fair defense so that the innocent aren't railroaded. And there's people whose job it is to make sure that people are if they're guilty of something, that guilt is brought to light and they're prosecuted properly. And there are people whose job it is to sit there and make sure that it's a fair process, that one of these people isn't twisting the arm of justice. And there's people whose job it is to listen to all of it and come up with a verdict. And that's us if we get the jury duty thing. That's the way our justice system works. And it's not perfect. But it's really, really good in comparison to some of the other options. Because remember all the people I've just mentioned? What if you had just one dude whose job it was to bring about justice? That's the way it is in most of the world, and it's certainly the way it was in Paul's time. Paul stood before just one guy trying to seek justice. And it was rough. But the reality is that societies and participation in a particular society shapes us to have a particular understanding of what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a just person, a fair person. And all societies come to you with their value system, and they're trying to give it to you. Participation in a jury doesn't seem like a particularly spiritually formative thing, but it is. Participation in our justice system, it is a thing that forms us and shapes us and hands us a set of values. Participation in a classroom, participation in a political convention, voting or not voting, all of these things are things that shape your heart, that shape who you are. The television that you choose to watch, and the sporting events that we go to. All these things, they give us a particular understanding of what it is to be good. The concert you listen to, does it make you good? And it's all shaping a particular set of values. We live in a pluralistic society, and by that I mean there are many sets of values. If you look at most of our society, it boils down to two kind of big ideas. And those things are trying to hand you a set of values to say this is what's important. Either the care of the poor or maybe freedom. But what is it that's most important? And those values are settling into you. You choose a narrative that you like, and it shapes who you are. And participation in that society shapes us. Now, what if you were dealing with a person who rejected the value system of the society? A person who said, world around me, you don't get to tell me what's true, you don't get to tell me what's important, and you don't get to tell me what's fair and good. I'm going to figure those things out a different way than you folks are doing it. What would that person be like? Well, they'd be very confusing. The rest of us simply wouldn't understand anything that that person did. Sometimes they would seem very much like one of us. If they grew up among us, they would learn the rules. They would learn the system. They would know how things work. And they would seem like us because they would work that system according to their values. But if in the very next moment, we wouldn't be able to understand what they were doing at all. It would be completely perplexing to see some of the things that they said and did. That's called being a Christian. Because Christians who live in America are Christians who happen to be Americans, not Americans who happen to be Christian. The defining reality of who we are is Christian. And the value system that we embrace is Christian, not American. Because in every system in our culture, you will find things that are hostile to our faith. If your faith holds hands perfectly with your culture, then you have surrendered your faith. We are meant to be different. We are meant to be in the world and not of it. We are meant to be the called out. And while at times we will look very American, it is not because we have an American value system. Our values come from Christ and who He is. This is what we see today in Paul's interaction with Festus, the governor. This guy is a very good Roman. He's a very good Roman leader. Now, in our text, he doesn't come off all that great because he's an instrument of bad forces. But he was really super competent. The guy before him, Felix, was a really nice guy. Really nice. Totally incompetent leader. He allowed brigands and bandits to rise up all over the place. The Jews were very unhappy with his leadership. So much so that when he was removed from office, they went to Rome. A delegate went to Rome, a delegation, a group of people went to Rome to bring charges against Felix to get him killed. I can't remember how that turned out, but they were really dissatisfied with him. Festus, however, he is a good, competent leader. And you see the marks of that in the text. He's very decisive. You want to do this? Fine, we'll do it. He does that several times in the text. And you see him he's really sharp. He knows what he's doing. He's very politically savvy. He wants to make sure that, okay, this is a very difficult group of people to rule. And if I'm going to be able to rule them, I'm going to have to figure out how to give them what they need and want. And so he works to be cooperative. I mean, he's a great Roman. And he has great Roman values. And what the Romans really valued above anything else was keeping the peace so that the taxes keep flowing. That was their big, important thing. If there were some mild injustices here and there, what does he care? As long as society is kind of held together. And so you see a really competent Roman leader dealing with a weirdo. Because the stuff of Paul, well, sometimes he seems like a completely normal Roman. But every so often, he will just be totally bizarre. Let's look at this. Now, 3 days after Festus arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Why is he doing that? Well, Caesarea is kind of where his seat of governance is. But he knows good and well that Jerusalem is where the power is in this area. It's where the people who matter are. And so like a good Roman governor, he goes to make sure that he can get in good with the people that matter. He's being smart. He's being competent. So, and the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. And they urged him, wait a minute. 2 years have passed. 2 years. Paul has languished in jail and given them 2 years to forget about him. And apparently, among one of the very first things that they care about is killing Paul. Luke is showing us that the Judaism here, that the leaders of what ought to have been the religious movement that led people to God has become murderous and unforgiving. I've met churches like that. I've met Christians like that. Part of the reason this picture is in here is to be a warning to us religious people. Don't lose sight of your values. Because if you do, you'll become killers. I've seen that. Have you? I've been in churches where the people are just mean. God forbid it should ever rise here. Anyway, so the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor, and that word's going to show up a couple of times in the text, asking as a favor against Paul that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. I suspect they did not share that particular detail with Festus. I suspect they kind of kept that to themselves. But because Festus is going to try and get it to happen, and if he's traveling with them, he may die too. So Festus replied that Paul was being kept in Caesarea, and then he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, let the men of authority among you who go down with me. And if there's anything wrong about the men, let them bring charges against him. So you see what he's done there? He said, you can be my traveling companions. He's trying to get in good with these people. Because that's the way the system works. And he's being a good, smart Roman. You're supposed to assimilate as much as you can the people you govern. And these Jews are really hard to assimilate. They won't grab our gods. They won't worship our gods. They won't have anything to do with us. But any way that you can get them, get them. And so that's what he's doing. He's smart. He's clever. He's a good Roman. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day, you see how rapidly he's doing this? He's wanting to make sure, okay, you guys got a problem? I'm your solve-it man. I will keep the peace. I will keep Rome happy. I will keep my province happy. I know what I'm doing. So the next day, he took his seat on the tribunal and he ordered Paul be brought. The tribunal is going to be a special chair with actually a raised dais. It's going to have curtains around it and beautiful eagles and gold everywhere. I mean, it's a portable courtroom is what it is. And he's sitting there in this courtroom and he says, all right, let's bring Paul here. Let's get this thing. You got a problem. I'm going to solve it for you. And when he arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Now, Festus is a good Roman, but his willingness to capitulate to injustice is minimal. If they can't prove their case, he's not going to kill them just because they want him dead. That would be murder by government, and he's not into that. He'll execute the man if he needs to be executed, but he's not willing to do it just because of charges that are brought. And Paul gives a pretty curt defense. I suspect we hear in this the impatience of having been in jail for 2 years, right? So Paul argued his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. Sick and tired of being in jail. And his string of responses is interesting. Against the law of the Jews, that's going to be it's going to be religious, or against the temple, that's going to be religious, but a place where you have a mixture of religious and secular, and then against Caesar, which is fully secular. He's saying, I haven't committed any kind of crime at all. I've not done a religious crime, and I've not done a secular crime. I haven't. They can't prove it because it isn't there. I mean, don't you think that if he brought a Gentile into the court, they'd have produced that person by now? They'd had 2 years to make their case, and they can't make the case. So he says, I haven't done anything. Now here's where Festus gets very, very Roman. And Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor. See, he's like, okay, how can I use this situation to buy political influence for myself? Because that's the system. In fact, that's the way that most human systems are, aren't they? We seek our own best interests. We look out for ourselves. We want our lives to be good, and we want good entertainment, we want good food, we want good government, and by good government, we mean the one I want. We want things to go well for ourselves. That's the nature of human systems. And that's what Festus is doing. He's being a good human being, a good Roman. And what do good Romans do? They keep the peace. They keep things looking pretty good. And so Festus says, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem there to be tried for these charges before me? Now I think Festus has no idea what that means. Paul does, though. Because Paul knows that there's 40 people on a hunger fast, and they've been going without food for 2 years. So they're probably pretty hungry and ready to kill him, don't you think? Probably they gave up the hunger strike when he got arrested, but they're still hot and angry, and he knows it. He's seen the delegate that came up and brought the charges. They surrounded him when they brought charges. He knows what he's up against. He knows they're going to kill him. So what's Paul supposed to do? Well, given his value system, he's not supposed to value his life. If it can serve God for Paul to die, then what is Paul supposed to do? He's supposed to die. That's what Christians are called to. We are called to death. One of the reasons you go into that water is so that when you come out of it, you can say, okay, now I've died. So if it comes at me again, I've already done that. I don't have to be afraid of that anymore. And I don't live my life for myself anymore. The world systems will all encourage me to do that. They will encourage me to hate other people because they disagree with me. But God's systems will encourage me to love other people who hurt me. See, I've died, so I don't live their way anymore. And yet at the same time, Paul's not supposed to just throw his life away. And neither are we, because it's not ours. Our lives have been bought with a price. We are not our own. And so we are to live to the glory of God. And so Paul's got to look at this and say, okay, if they kill me down there, does God get glory? Besides, didn't Jesus tell me I'm supposed to testify in His name before Caesar? So I can't go die there, even though I'd kind of like to, because this life is getting kind of boring. I traveled all over the place starting churches. I've spent 2 years being some governor's entertainment monkey. I'm sick of this. And dying's got to look pretty attractive. But no, I won't waste my life. I don't mind dying if I have to, but I'm not going to die for their joy. So what does Paul do? Paul said, I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. Does that mean he's not willing to submit to the Jews anymore? Well, not to those Jews or over his blood, but he's certainly willing to submit to the Jewish law and the Jewish legal system if it weren't run by maniacs. But he says, I can't get a fair trial there. And I am a Roman citizen. I have citizen rights. I ought to get tried right here, right now. I'm a good American, and I know what my rights are. And you can't take them away from me. So he says, I ought to be tried right here. To the Jews, I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. Now, how does he know that? Well, because he inherited all of Felix's documents. And in those documents was a letter from a Roman official that was sent with him when he was rescued from that mob. So when he looks at this case, he's prepared and he knows there's no charge that deserves death. He knows it. And Paul knows he knows it. He says, you yourself know, if then I'm a wrongdoer and I've committed anything for which I deserve to die, I don't seek to escape death. That's weird. That's weird. But if there's nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. And like I said, on the one hand here, Paul knows his rights, and he sounds very much like a good Roman. A good Roman citizen, among many other rights, had the right to say, you cannot kill me here. Not out here in the provinces. As a citizen of Rome, I can die in Rome. And I'm going to, or I'm going to be set free. Because I'm going to appeal to the highest authority. You could do this before trial. You could do it in the middle of a trial. You could do it in a trial if the end of the trial didn't work out the way you wanted it to. You could appeal to Caesar. And a Roman citizen, and there were thousands of these, well outside the city, tons outside the city. Paul's one of them. Not everybody could do this. Only Roman citizens could. But Paul knows his rights. Just like we probably ought to know our rights, right? The things given to us by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, because we can use these to the service of the kingdom in this society. And particularly if society continues to shift away from Christianity being an appealing thing. You know, I read a story this week about a newspaper that rejected an advertisement in its classified ads because it contained an offensive word. Do you know what that offensive word was? Christian. It's for a bookstore, and they were closing one of their 2 sites, and so they advertised, this is just over the hill here in Kentucky, they advertised they wanted to say, the something or other Christian bookstore, this place is having a going out of business sale. Our society is shifting away from giving us our rights. And we, as Christians who live in America, who are American citizens, ought to know our rights. And we ought to use them to the service of the kingdom. But on the other hand, Paul doesn't sound anything like a Roman. I mean, nothing like a Roman. Because these words are not Roman words. Romans don't say things like this. If I'm a wrongdoer and I've committed anything which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. No, Romans always seek to escape death. If you're a Roman citizen, you plead for your life. You beg for your life. That guy Felix, the Jewish delegate that came over to accuse him of being very, very bad at his job, he appealed to his uncle, who happened to be a good friend of the Caesar, and said, hey, can you get me out of this, please? Because I don't want to die. Because Romans were scared of death. I mean, who isn't? Christians. We aren't scared of death. We don't have to be. Because we know it's defeated. And we have a value system that says, I follow Jesus even if it costs me my life, which is bizarre. Bizarre in the Roman world, bizarre in this one, bizarre no matter where you go. Because we are not only willing to die, but we count our lives cheap if it means the glory of God. And we don't waste our lives because it's given to us by God and bought by Jesus Christ. But we don't hold them as precious either. What we hold as precious is Jesus and faithfulness to Him. And we follow Him even if it means we follow Him into a tomb, because He's already been there and He came back out, and so do we. And so Paul says, I'm not scared of dying. I'm a Christian. And I'm not saying this to try to get out of death. I'm saying this because this isn't right, what's happening here. And Festus, like a good Roman, he says, he confers with his council, and I guarantee you what they said is, he's given you an out, take it. You don't have to deal with this weirdo and those crazy people anymore. You know, they have to submit to Roman rule. Get out of this. And he comes back and he says, to Caesar you've appealed, to Caesar you shall go. And no problem with me anymore. Good. Go away. Good Roman. Do you see how different the Roman looks from the Christian? Because the Roman's looking out for himself over and over. He's looking to do favors. He's looking to ingratiate himself with the people, not over him, under him. He's looking to try to fit in. He's looking to try to have an easy, good reign. That's all he cares about. How many Christians are trying to fit in? How many Christians are trying to have an easy, good life? Just be like everybody else. Just fit in. Because, folks, there are forces all around us that are encouraging you to do that. Adopt this value system. Be like this. Be like everybody else. But not Paul. Paul says, kill me if you want to. I really don't care. But that's not going to happen. That's weird, because it's Christian. And the question that the question that, I'm sorry, I'll get to the question in a second. Being a Christian means living in the midst of all of that. And by all that, I mean that. All of the forces pushing you to hate people. All the forces pushing you to say, our way's right and their way's wrong. And all the forces pushing you to be lustful or messy or whatever. All of the forces of our culture being in the midst of that without being a part of that. Jesus would say, be in the world, not of the world. And when he looked at Paul and his trial before Festus, Jesus would have said, there, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. He's in the world because he knows his rights and he's willing to use them for the glory of God. But he's not of the world because he's willing to die. That's what you be like. And that's what we have to be like. All these forces that would push us to take things, to become just another American. You are more than that. You are a Christian and you live in America. So I would ask, how different are we? How many of us are willing to take up the themes that were spoken in Philadelphia and in Cleveland in the last couple of weeks and use them to hate our neighbors? Because that's what they were about. They're about love me, hate those guys, they're the bad guys. You see how these forces pull us away from each other? You should never lose sight of love because of something as common as a candidate. How are you doing with this? How different are we? And if you look into your life and what you see is more America than Christ, then it's time to change direction because there is a better way. There's a way of life that I would put up against any other way of life. And it wins every time. And it goes on forever. But it is, in fact, a way of life where we love instead of hate, where we forgive everything, where we don't be driven by our hungers and our lusts, where we don't retaliate against wicked behavior, but we overcome evil with good. It's a way of life. The world is not going to encourage us to live it. If you were put on trial, would you look weird? How you doing? If this morning you look in your life and you want to go another direction and you want the help of the church, we'll pray for you. And it may be that you came here this morning with trouble in your life that is heavy, but it has nothing to do with what we've talked about. And that's fine, but if you want the prayers of the saints, they want to give them for you. And if this morning you're not a Christian, there is no better way of life than following Christ Jesus. If this morning you're subject to the invitation of God, why don't you come right now while we stand and sing?